Genetics Matters, a podcast. Episode 1, an introduction. Welcome to Genetics Matters. I am Brad Goodner, Professor of Biology at Hiram College, and I will be your host for these 10 to 15 minute audio tales about genetics. While most of the technological progress of the 20th century was based mostly on chemistry and physics, there was a concurrent explosion in biological knowledge, and much of that had to do with genetics. So much so that in the first decades of the 21st century, we're at the point of knowing our individual genetic histories and contemplating medical breakthroughs personalized to that genetic history. So what is genetics? Well, for centuries, people have noticed that children tend to look most like their parents, that somehow one generation could influence the traits of the next generation. This idea of heredity, the vertical transmission of some type of information, appears to apply to all organisms on Earth. At the same time, humans also noticed that there was some variation in the traits of any organism, and while offspring tended to look and act like their parents, there would be a blonde in a family of brunettes, or blue eyes in a family of brown eyes. In some cases, one could find relatives further back in the family tree that shared these variant traits, but sometimes the variation was truly novel. Genetics is the study of how traits are inherited, and the study of how variation in traits occurs. Roughly 10,000 years ago, humans started domesticating plants and animals as we moved from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle to a more settled agricultural lifestyle. Humans started selecting which individual plants or animals had traits desirable for human use or enjoyment. Selected individuals were chosen for breeding purposes. Without knowing the mechanics involved, we humans started manipulating the genetics of other organisms 10,000 years ago, and we haven't stopped. In this way, genetics is also a strategy for purposely changing how organisms look and behave. We've only begun to truly understand the components and processes of genetics in the last 150 years or so. For example, I was born in 1960, and everyone in my generation and afterwards has grown up knowing that DNA is the basic component of heredity, the so-called genetic material of all life on Earth. We now know how DNA sequences tend to stay the same, yet also how they can change both naturally and in response to outside perturbations. We now know how DNA sequences influence traits. We even know how to purposely manipulate DNA sequences in order to get new traits into organisms that had never had that trait before. This is the storyline we will be exploring in this podcast. Since we all know something about DNA, we will not ignore that knowledge and begin our study wholly ignorant. Rather, we will build on what we learned in our K-12 days. We will see the power inherent even in basic genetic knowledge, and then we will build from there to understand more complex ideas. We will work through key experiments to see how we have arrived at what we know. Finally, we will see what is possible today and in the future and contemplate the potential risk and rewards. I hope you find this intellectual journey interesting and useful. Thank you for listening to Episode 1 of Genetic Matters.